The morning sky over Germany looked calm from a distance, but inside the waist compartment of a Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, nothing felt calm. It was February 1945. The bomber shuddered at 25,000 feet as freezing air leaked through every seam in the aluminum fuselage. The temperature outside was far below zero. Frost clung to the gun mounts.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.
Engine noise was so loud it felt like a constant earthquake. Every man aboard knew that somewhere beyond the clouds, German fighters were waiting. Staff Sergeant Robert Turner, a waist gunner in the United States Army Air Forces, pressed his gloved hand against the metal frame and stared out into the pale sky. His bomber was part of a massive formation heading toward targets deep inside the shrinking Third Reich. Hundreds of bombers stretched across the horizon like silver boxes. They looked powerful together, but Turner had seen what happened when the fighters arrived. In minutes, a perfect formation could become a burning graveyard. The crew had flown enough missions to know the routine. First came the long climb from Italy. Then the silence as everyone waited. Then the black bursts of anti-aircraft fire. And finally the deadliest moment of all, when fast shapes appeared in the distance and started closing in. German pilots had spent years perfecting their attacks on American bombers. They knew where to hit. They knew how to exploit fear. They knew that one accurate burst into an engine, cockpit, or fuel tank could destroy a bomber and everyone inside it. Turner had watched friends disappear in flashes of orange and black smoke. He had seen parachutes bloom, and he had seen aircraft fall with no survivors. Some bomber crews quietly counted their chances. Fly 25 missions, and you might go home. But every time the wheels left the runway, statistics meant nothing. Survival depended on who showed up when the enemy attacked. That morning, Turner looked out and saw something unfamiliar. Far above and slightly behind the bomber stream, sleek fighters moved into position. Their tails were painted a deep, unmistakable red. Even at a distance, they stood out against the winter sky. Some men in Turner's crew still carried doubts. They had heard rumors months earlier when these pilots first appeared in the Mediterranean theater. Many bomber crews had never met them. Some questioned whether they had enough experience. Others simply repeated the prejudices common in the United States at the time. But crews who had already flown with them told a different story. They said one thing again and again. When the Red Tails escorted your bomber, they stayed. Turner adjusted his heated suit and kept watching. The red-tailed fighters held their positions with remarkable discipline. They did not dart off chasing easy kills. They flew as if tied to the bombers by invisible cables. Their job was not glory. Their job was to bring the bombers home. The men flying those fighters had traveled a much harder road than most airmen in the war. Their story began far from Europe, in the segregated American South, at Tuskegee Army Airfield. In 1941, the U.S. military created an experiment that many powerful people expected to fail. African American pilots would be trained to fly combat aircraft. The idea faced resistance from the start. Some military officials argued, without evidence, that black pilots lacked the ability to handle advanced aircraft. Others feared that success would challenge the foundations of segregation. The standards at Tuskegee were demanding. Cadets studied navigation, gunnery, meteorology, aircraft systems, and formation flying. Instructors pushed them relentlessly. Any mistake could be used as proof that the experiment should end. The men who arrived at Tuskegee understood the burden they carried. They were not just training for themselves. They were training for every person who had been told they were not capable. Failure would confirm the prejudices of their critics. Success would open a door that many wanted locked. Among them was Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., the son of a future general. Davis had already endured years of isolation. As a cadet at United States Military Academy, many classmates refused to speak to him. He answered that silence with discipline and determination. At Tuskegee, he became the leader the unit needed, calm, exacting, and unwilling to accept excuses. The first combat unit formed from the program was the 99th Fighter Squadron. In 1943, the squadron deployed to North Africa. Their early aircraft, the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, were rugged but not ideal against the latest German fighters. The squadron flew ground attack missions and slowly gained experience under combat conditions. At first, some commanders criticized their performance, often without understanding the difficult missions they had been assigned. But combat reports told a more balanced story. The pilots were learning quickly. They were disciplined under fire, and they were proving they could fight as effectively as any unit in theater. By 1944, additional squadrons joined to form the 332nd Fighter Group under Colonel Davis. The group initially flew Bell P-39 Airacobra and Republic P-47 Thunderbolt aircraft before transitioning to the North American P-51 Mustang. The Mustang changed everything. Fast, heavily armed, and capable of escorting bombers deep into Germany, the P-51 was one of the finest fighters of the war. The 332nd painted the tails of their Mustangs bright red for identification. Soon, bomber crews began referring to them simply as the Red Tails. The nickname spread across the Mediterranean and into Europe. At first, some German pilots reportedly viewed the colorful tails as an easy way to identify their opponents. They underestimated the men behind the controls. That mistake did not last. Back inside Robert Turner's B-17, the interphone crackled. The pilot reported enemy aircraft approaching from the 12 o'clock position. Turner tightened his grip on the twin 50-caliber machine guns. Through the plexiglass window, he saw tiny specks growing larger. The attackers were likely Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf LW-190s, veterans of years of air combat. Their pilots were experienced, aggressive, and increasingly desperate. By early 1945, Germany was losing the war on the ground, but its fighter force still posed a lethal threat to Allied bombers. The German pilots formed for a frontal attack, one of the most dangerous tactics against heavy bombers. Closing speeds could exceed 600 miles per hour. Pilots had only seconds to fire before breaking away. A single cannon shell could tear through a cockpit or ignite fuel. Turner tracked one fighter in his sights, but before he could fire, red-tailed Mustangs dived from above. The attack was sudden and precise. The P-51s did not wander. They struck the German fighters before they could press home their assault. Contrails twisted across the sky as Mustangs rolled into high-speed turns. Machine guns flashed. One FW-190 broke formation trailing smoke. Another snapped into a dive toward the clouds. Inside the B-17, the crew watched with a mix of fear and awe. The bombers continued on course while the Red Tails fought just beyond the formation. It was exactly what bomber crews wanted, escorts that treated the bombers as the center of the mission. This doctrine reflected Colonel Davis's strict instructions. Pilots were told that protecting bombers came before pursuing individual victories. In air combat, the temptation to chase a damaged enemy could be overwhelming. Davis discouraged that impulse. Discipline saved lives. The strategy earned the respect of bomber crews. In letters home and in post-mission debriefings, crews repeatedly noted that the Red Tails stayed close and responded quickly to threats. Their reliability built trust mission after mission. The 332nd Fighter Group escorted bombers to some of the most heavily defended targets in Europe, including Berlin, Munich, and Vienna. These missions stretched aircraft and pilots to their limits. Fuel management was critical. Mechanical failures could be fatal. If a pilot became separated from the group over enemy territory, the chances of capture or death were high. The pilots themselves faced a second battle beyond combat. They wore the same uniforms and accepted the same risks as other American airmen, yet they returned to segregated facilities and unequal treatment. Their success in the air carried a significance larger than any one mission. One of the group's most famous engagements took place on March 24, 1945, during an escort mission to Berlin. On that day, pilots of the 332nd encountered advanced German jets, including the Messerschmitt Me-262. Despite the speed advantage of the jets, Tuskegee airmen claimed several victories. The engagement demonstrated that the Red Tails could confront even the Luftwaffe's most modern aircraft. Among the group's top aces was Lee Archer, credited with 4 confirmed aerial victories and additional probable kills. Archer was known for sharp eyesight, aggressive tactics, and calm under pressure. Like many in the unit, he focused less on personal fame than on doing the job well. Other notable pilots included Roscoe Brown, who was credited with destroying a Me-262, and Charles McGee, who later flew in 3 wars and became one of the most respected aviators in American history. Their careers reflected a combination of skill, endurance, and professionalism. As Turner's bomber continued toward its target, another wave of enemy fighters approached from the right. The German pilots were persistent. Some attacked through defensive fire. Others used clouds to hide their approach. The sky became a moving maze of aircraft, smoke, and tracer rounds. Turner fired a burst as a Bf-109 flashed across his field of view. He could not tell whether he hit it. In combat, certainty was rare. What he did know was that the German fighter never reached the bomber formation. A red-tailed Mustang swept in behind it, forcing it to break away. Flak began moments later. Black explosions blossomed around the formation. The bomber lurched as fragments struck the fuselage. Every crewman listened for changes in engine sound, hydraulic pressure, and oxygen flow. The aircraft held together. The bomb run was the most rigid part of the mission. Once the bombardier took control, the bomber flew straight and level. It became a predictable target. German gunners knew this and concentrated their fire. Bomber crews often described these minutes as the longest of the mission. Bombs released. The B-17 jumped slightly as thousands of pounds of weight dropped away. Turner exhaled for what felt like the first time in several minutes. But the danger was not over. The return flight could be just as deadly. On the trip home, the Red Tails were still there. For Turner and countless other bomber crewmen, that fact carried enormous emotional weight. Fear did not disappear, but confidence replaced some of the dread. Men who had doubted the escorts now searched the sky for those unmistakable red tails. By the end of the war, the Tuskegee Airmen had compiled a combat record that commanded respect. They flew more than 15,000 sorties in Europe and North Africa. They destroyed enemy aircraft in the air and on the ground. According to widely cited wartime totals, the 332nd Fighter Group and associated units were credited with 112 enemy aircraft destroyed in aerial combat. Numbers alone do not capture what those victories meant. Every enemy fighter shot down was one less threat to a bomber crew. Every successful escort mission increased the odds that 10 men in a B-17 or B-24 would return to their families. The Red Tails also earned an impressive list of decorations, including Distinguished Flying Crosses, Silver Stars, and numerous air medals. Their achievements were recognized by officers who cared most about results. In combat, Performance mattered. Yet myths also grew around the unit, including the often repeated claim that they never lost a bomber to enemy fighters. Historical research shows that some bombers under their escort were in fact lost. But the more important truth remains unchanged. They developed a reputation among bomber crews for exceptional discipline and dependable protection. German pilots noticed as well. By late 1944 and early 1945, the Luftwaffe was struggling with shortages of fuel, aircraft, and experienced pilots. Facing any well-flown Allied escort was dangerous. Facing pilots who combined skill with strict escort discipline made attacking the bomber stream even harder. The laughter faded because combat erased illusions. In the sky over Europe, no one cared about rumors or prejudice. A pilot was judged by formation integrity, gunnery, tactical awareness, and the ability to survive. The Red Tails proved themselves by those standards again and again. When Robert Turner's B-17 finally crossed back over friendly territory, the tension in the aircraft began to ease. Men checked damage. They counted parachutes in the sky. They looked at each other with the exhausted expressions of those who had survived another mission. As the bomber descended toward its airfield in Italy, Turner looked out once more. The red-tailed Mustangs peeled away and headed for their own base. Their silhouettes grew smaller until they disappeared into the afternoon haze. The crew removed oxygen masks and heavy gloves after landing. Some men laughed with relief. Others sat quietly, absorbing the fact that they were still alive. Turner knew exactly why. The enemy had come, and the Red Tails had met them. Stories like his spread throughout the bomber force. Crews talked in mess halls and briefing rooms. Skepticism turned into trust. Trust turned into admiration. The pilots once treated as an experiment became some of the most respected escorts in the theater. The significance of their service extended beyond the war. In 1948, Harry S. Truman issued Executive Order 9981 directing the desegregation of the U.S. Armed Forces. Many factors contributed to that decision, but the combat record of the Tuskegee Airmen had removed any credible argument that African American service members lacked ability or leadership. Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. continued his career and eventually became a four-star general in the United States Air Force. Charles McGee flew for decades and inspired new generations of pilots. Survivors of the program spent years ensuring that the story would be remembered accurately. In 2007, the Tuskegee Airmen were collectively awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the highest civilian honors in the United States. The recognition came decades after they first climbed into their cockpits, but it confirmed what bomber crews and even their enemies had learned during the war. The Red Tails were not symbols because of paint on their aircraft. They were symbols because they transformed doubt into proven performance. They trained under suspicion, fought under extraordinary pressure, and succeeded where failure would have reinforced injustice. Somewhere in the skies over Europe, German pilots may indeed have laughed when they first saw those bright red tails. They may have assumed that prejudice in America reflected reality in combat. But assumptions disappear quickly when tracer rounds cross your canopy and disciplined escorts break up your attack. By the war's end, the numbers told part of the story. More than 15,000 sorties flown, hundreds of bomber missions escorted, 112 enemy aircraft destroyed in the air, countless bomber crewmen brought home. But the deeper story cannot be reduced to statistics. It lives in the frozen waste compartment of a B-17, where a gunner looked out at a deadly sky and saw red tails holding formation. It lives in the confidence that replaced fear when those fighters appeared. And it lives in the realization that history can change when people are given the chance to prove what they can do. On that cold day over Germany, Robert Turner watched the red tails disappear into the distance after escorting his bomber safely home. He would remember the color of their aircraft long after the war ended, not because the paint was striking, but because it meant survival. The men who flew those fighters entered the war with more to prove than most. They left with a combat record that earned respect from bomber crews, from military leaders, and from former enemies. In the sky over Europe, the red tails answered mockery with discipline, prejudice with skill, and danger with courage. And after 112 confirmed victories, no one was laughing anymore.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.